Fellas, UFC fighters who have had a career-damaging year. Now, there's been some fighters who have had a year that has been great for them. They've gone on winning streaks, they've gone to win world titles, or they've just had extremely impressive finishes. I've already done a video on that if you want to go check that out. But today, we're going to be talking about the opposite of that. Fighters who have had a career-damaging year. I'll tell you the criteria for this before I get into it. First of all, I'm going to say, I'm obviously not going to include every single fighter in the UFC who have had a career-damaging year because this video would probably be going on forever. So I'm going to be including the ones that kind of stick out for me or the ones that are pretty obvious for me. But obviously you guys can have your own opinions and let me know what they are. But yeah, the criteria for what is a career-damaging year. Well, first of all, the criteria for a career-damaging year, you can't win a single fight this year. If you win a single fight, it can't really be a damaging year for me. I mean, there's definitely years where you can have a fight that negatively affects your career, but for me, a fully career-damaging year, it has to be, you can't really win a fight in this year. On top of that, I feel like you must have been finished or dominated at least once. 2 dodgy decisions I'm not going to count as a career-damaging year. You must have either been finished in a fight or at least dominated pretty comfortably in one of them. And this should have negatively impacted their career. So either it stopped the hype, it stopped them from getting a title shot, etc., things like that. And then the final one is that they must have lost at least twice this year. I'm not going to count someone losing once as a career-damaging year. I feel like they have to lose at least 2 times in this year for it to count as a career-damaging year. But we're going to go in there with the first fighter, which I'm just going to get him out of the way because listen, I don't want to see this guy lose again. Tony Ferguson. And I'm going to say 2020 is the year that kind of damaged his career. You could have gone 2022 because he got finished by Chandler, then got finished by Nate Diaz. But I'm going with 2020 because this was kind of the end of the winning streak and the beginning of the losing streak. This is kind of the worst year to be a Tony Ferguson fan because coming into this year, he was on this massive winning streak. He had hopes of fighting and beating Khabib. He was on a 12-fight winning streak as well. And he just had a bunch of wins that he was racking up. He was the boogeyman El Kakui. And now 2020 happens. And in this year, he starts by fighting Gaethje, gets finished by Gaethje, and he got battered. That Gaethje fight genuinely broke Tony Ferguson. Gaethje, yeah, he just completely battered Tony Ferguson in that fight, and that was the fight that kind of stopped Tony Ferguson from being the killer that he was. Then he goes out there and fights Charles Oliveira and nearly gets submitted by an armbar. But yeah, he gets comfortably, I don't want to say comfortably dominated because that doesn't really make sense, but he lost pretty fair and square against Charles Oliveira by decision. So 2021, the best year for Tony Ferguson at all. I'm going to say this year definitely damaged his career because, I mean, you could even narrow it down to just the Gaethje fight because ever since Ferguson fought Gaethje, he hasn't really been the same. He hasn't even won a fight yet. He's going to be fighting Paddy Pimblett this December. And let me just say this, if Tony Ferguson loses to Paddy Pimblett, that might be the most depressing fight in MMA history. So hopefully Tony Ferguson pulls off a win against Paddy Pimblett. I'll be predicting that fight later in December. But yeah, this was the one that ended the losing streak. And for me, 2020 was definitely a career-damaging year for Tony Ferguson. This new decade was complete opposite for Ferguson. You could have used other years as well because he, like I said, he hasn't actually had a win since this year. Well, since 2019 really, but 2020 for me, I'm going to go Ferguson because it broke him. It ended the winning streak. So I'm going to go Tony Ferguson. Next year, 2017, I'm going Michael Bisping. Now, coming into 2017, Michael Bisping was on top of the world. He just won the belt. In fact, I'd go as far to say that 2016 was the best year in Michael Bisping's career. He knocked out Luke Rockhold to become the champion and defended it against, what's his name, Dan Henderson, the guy who knocked him out before. Got his get back on Dan Henderson. So 2016 was a really good year, but 2017... this all went wrong for him. Now, I'm not saying this is a career. I guess you can kind of say it's not really a damaging career because he didn't really have a career after this. But I guess you can go out there and say that he did retire him this year because he did end up retiring from the Kelvin Gastelum fight. But GSP makes a return and dominates Bisping. It was one of the biggest forms of, the purest forms of domination we've seen. Puts Bisping to sleep in 2017. Then less than a month later, this is what's really surprising. Less than a month after the GSP fight, he comes back and goes back to sleep as Kelvin Gastelum sleeps him. And then Bisping retired. His entire career was gone. It was kind of obvious that he was going to retire soon. He was getting old. I mean, he'd only just won the belt. I didn't expect him to be around for a while, but I'm shocked that he took the Gastelum fight. I don't know why he took that fight. Apparently it was because he wanted to he thought it was a winnable fight for him and he wanted to get his ego back up. But yeah, this year just wasn't great for him. After winning the belt in 2016, this year kind of, took him down a peg. And I'd say 2017 was definitely not a great year for Michael Bisping, and it definitely damaged his career. I mean, there's been so many. I mean, even the trash talk going into the GSP fight, all that trash talk just to get dare I say, humiliated in that fight. So I'm going to go Michael Bisping for 2017. Next fighter in next year, Vincente Luque 2022. And the reason I say Vincente Luque is because, listen, am I saying he's got no chance of becoming a champion again? Am I saying his career's over? No. But this year really just slowed down Vincente Luque. He was on a winning streak in the UFC. He was doing really well in the UFC. And this year, it really started to slow him down. He was on a vicious win streak as well. A bunch of finishes on there as well, submissions, TKOs, and I like to call this guy the silent killer because he didn't really say much, but he'd absolutely destroy and starch people in the octagon. But 2022 came. I don't know what it was, but this year he just couldn't get the rhythm going. He got finished by Jeff Neal. I think it was round 3 that he got finished. Gets finished by Jeff Neal, and Jeff Neal is extremely underrated, by the way, to be able to finish Luque that was on a fresh winning streak. But he also lost to Bilal Muhammad as well. Bilal Muhammad, and I'm calling it the Bilal Muhammad treatment because it wasn't just like he got finished in a really cool fashion. It was 5 rounds of Bilal Muhammad. 5 rounds of Bilal Muhammad, it should be like a curse on the UFC. If you're having to face Bilal Muhammad for 5 rounds, you better brace yourself. If you're a fan, you probably got to stop watching the fight. If you had to fight Bilal Muhammad for 5 rounds and he lost both of these fights, one was extremely boring, the other one he got finished. And am I saying that Vincente Luque's got no chance? I mean, like I said with Ferguson, he's also fighting in December against Ian Gary. I hope he wins, but he's just got a win over Rafael dos Anjos as well. It wasn't the most interesting fight, but I mean, fair play to beating RDA. RDA is really old now, but he's still got it in him. I mean, look at what he did to Renato Moicano. So, Luque, 2022 wasn't the best year for him. It definitely damaged his career, but hopefully he can start picking up a few wins and maybe get back in the title talks. Next fighter, Adrian Yanez. Adrian Yanez, also known as Mini Masvidal. Doesn't he look so much like Masvidal? When I saw him and Masvidal on the UFC 287 card, I was tripping because they look so similar. But Adrian Yanez, 2023 so far hasn't been a great year for him. Coming into 2023, I was so excited to see Adrian Yanez versus Rob Font because Adrian Yanez is a dangerous striker, coming off a fresh knockout over Tony Kelly. He started showing personality. But this year, it's just not been a great year for him. He's been finished twice now, and I just want to see this guy win again because he was such a good prospect in the bantamweight division. Undefeated as well before the Rob Font, well, not undefeated in the UFC before the Rob Font fight, but it was a big prospect. Fights Rob Font at UFC 287 in a banger fight, and he got brutally knocked out in the first round. It wasn't even like it was a war. I was expecting it to be a back and forth war, and I expected maybe Yanez would be able to finish him in the later rounds, but he gets knocked out early by Rob Font, which just wasn't a good look on a big card like UFC 287. Comes back in October this year, I think it was, against Jonathan Martinez, and Jonathan Martinez chewed this guy's legs up and finished him again. And Adrian Yanez, I feel like the hype has kind of gone. Like, I'm not just saying he's a hype job. I'm not saying he's a talentless hype job like Paddy Pimblett, but it feels like the hype of Adrian Yanez just isn't there anymore. Of course, I'm going to tune in when he fights and everything, but I just don't see, I don't know, he just doesn't have that same aura about him as he did before. Hopefully, he can start picking up a few wins, but he's still a dangerous striker. It's just those 2 finished losses. He just, I don't know, I don't want to say it exposed him because it didn't expose him. I don't know the words, but Adrian Yanez, he was a big prospect coming into this year, and this year just hasn't been great. He's lost twice, been finished twice, and one of them was really brutal as well. So I'm going to go Adrian Yanez for 2023. I just want to see this guy win again. Hopefully he can pick up a win, but it hasn't been a great year for him. Next fighter, Conor McGregor, 2021. Now, people are going to say, what about 2018 when he fought Khabib and got absolutely mauled? Because that obviously is probably it is the most popular fight in the UFC. But I'm going to go 2021. First of all, he hasn't fought since this year, right? He hasn't had a fight since. He's not been able to fight for about a year and a half. And this year has just transformed him, not only as a fighter because he hasn't been able to fight, he got his leg broken, but also as a person. This guy, I don't know what's going on with him. If you check his Twitter voice messages and you just look at his Twitter and look how he looks, the guy doesn't look normal. He looks like a middleweight. McGregor, I don't know what's been up with him this year, but he's definitely been on something to end up in the state that he's in. But if we're talking about him as a fighter in this year, he starts off the year, we get to see the first kind of glimpse of nice guy McGregor against Poirier, family man McGregor with his kid and everything. Doesn't work out well for him. He gets knocked out for the first time in his career against Dustin Poirier right at the start of the year. Then he tries getting his revenge on Poirier, and it wasn't just the fight, even the press conference. I feel like the third fight with Poirier, the press conference, obviously got knocked out in the second fight. But the third fight against Poirier, in the press conference, it just didn't seem like the normal McGregor. He wasn't really coming out with these one-liners. In fact, the one that Dustin Poirier said, something along the lines of, not McGregor fast, McGregor sleep. If anything, Dustin Poirier won the press conference, so did the pink suit guy. So McGregor, and then we go into the fight, And he was kind of getting dominated in the fight until he got his leg broken. And ever since he's got his leg broken, like I said, his career's been in shambles. He hasn't even got a fight booked. He's meant to fight in December, didn't happen. Then he was meant to fight at UFC 300, didn't happen. So McGregor's just been in an absolute state. He doesn't really know what he wants to do. So I'm going to say Conor McGregor 2021. This year really broke him. I know the Khabib fight wasn't great, but at least after the Khabib fight, he was able to come back and get a win over Cerrone in early 2020. But 2021 wasn't a great year for Conor McGregor. So I'm going to say that year is the year that screwed over Conor McGregor. And then finally, I'm going to go Anderson Silva 2013. Anderson Silva, some people view him as the greatest of all time. I definitely have him in the greatest of all time top 5. But I'd say 2013, again, kind of like Tony Ferguson. It was the end of the winning streak and the beginning of the end. Anderson Silva viewed as this striker who can't get beaten. This phenomenal striker, amazing defensively, even got some decent jiu-jitsu, one of the best kickers in the sport. But this year was really the end. I don't know if it was Weidman. Maybe Weidman is the end of Anderson Silva, kind of like his arch nemesis. But yeah, he starts off the fight with Weidman, mocking him, normal Anderson Silva, showboating, not really taking Weidman seriously, and then it bites him in the ass, gets knocked out in the first, he got knocked out against Weidman. And it was horrible, man. It was horrible for Anderson Silva and Anderson Silva fans. Seeing Anderson Silva get knocked out after humiliating, or at least attempting to humiliate Weidman, then he gets humiliated himself. You can literally go on like fight pages, and even non-UFC fans or non-UFC pages will be reposting this knockout just because of the, I guess you can say, instant karma of it. So, yeah, it just wasn't a great fight. And then he ends up rematching in the same year, Chris Weidman, kind of like the McGregor. Follows the kind of story of getting knocked out, then fights him again and gets his leg broken. And ever since he got his leg broken, he came back not as long as McGregor. I mean, he came back just over a year, so we didn't take a massive layoff like McGregor did. But yeah, it wasn't great. It wasn't great look for him. It wasn't a great look for Silva. Ends up going on this massive losing streak, and to be honest, the only fight he's won since this, well, not even this because he didn't win this, but since he lost at Chris Weidman, the only fight he's actually managed to win is Derek Brunson, which isn't that impressive. So Anderson Silva 2013 gets knocked out in the second round in the first fight, then in the second fight gets his leg broken, and he just hasn't been the same. I mean, he even lost a boxing fight to Jake Paul. So I'm going to say 2013 was the year that kind of broke Anderson Silva. Maybe he should have retired earlier than he did, but either way, it was kind of sad to see him retire in the Apex as well. I wish a guy like Anderson Silva would have retired somewhere else, but that, for me, is UFC fighters who had a career-damaging year. Let me know if you agree or if I missed any fighters out. Again, like I said at the start, I'm not going to be able to include every single fighter, but if there's any obvious ones, please let me know. And yeah, thank you for watching.